This podcast is brought to you by Startup Socials, a global community of entrepreneurs built to connect and empower people in the startup ecosystem.
We have the most illustrious, most interesting guests here telling us stories that sometimes are hard to believe, but since we believe them, we invite you to believe these stories as well. So today we have the pleasure of having Sam with us, and I'll turn the floor to my wonderful guest, who I think is drinking beer right now.
It's non-alcoholic beer.
We wouldn't hold it against you if it's alcoholic. Sam, please introduce yourself.
My name is Sam Parr. I live in San Francisco, but I'm in Missouri today to visit some family. So it's noon here. But all we had to drink was non-alcoholic beer. So that's what I'm drinking because it's cold and it's really hot here. I'm the founder of a company called HustleCon Media. We have a really popular website where we post interesting stories. And we also throw a really big annual festival called HustleCon.
So the first thing I went to HustleCon, and I should say it's sort of the coolness innate. So you guys are basically talking about anything that could be cool or things that are lacking coolness. And the first question that I have to you is this. I only lived, I'm originally from Russia, so I lived in the US for 20 years, and I only spent 7 of these years in San Francisco. One thing that really was amazing to me is how important this 4-letter word, cool, is to business, to startups. So you seem like a person to me who knows a lot about that. Can you talk to our audience about how they could add more coolness, how they could add more wonderful things to what they're doing so that just by nature of being awesome, just by nature of being wonderful and cool, their product or their service would get more users, would get more publicity?
Well, I think what we noticed, my co-founder and I, we always had this idea where we're like, we want to be sexy or cool because the average startup that we were looking at and the average website in Silicon Valley was all the same. And it was all really lame. Like really, really lame. It was so boring. Like they used words that every other company used. So because I'm from Missouri, my co-founder's from Texas. When we both moved to Silicon Valley, and we would often go home for holidays and stuff, we would explain like what we were working on to our Missouri or Texas friends. And like if you say lean startup to someone from Missouri, they're gonna be like, well, I don't know what that means. What are you talking about? Like that's not cool. Like they'll be like, it's lame. And then so we just got in a way of explaining it. So for example, we had a roommate matching company. My co-founder and I, we started a roommate matching company, and then it ended up being acquired. But when we would tell our friends in Texas and Missouri about our roommate matching company, at first it was like, well, we have this like algorithm and it like is really smart and it matches people, so it like optimizes like. And then they're like, what does that mean? And then eventually we were like, we just know these really fat parties so people can get drunk, hang out, meet one another, and then team up and get their own place and move in together. And they're like, oh, that sounds rad. That's really cool. And so that kind of like shaped our pitches from there on out. So when we described HustleCon to people, we weren't like, it's a conference for non-technical founders. We were like, it's kind of like TED, but way less douchey. And you learn all the business stuff to running a startup, kind of like a startup MBA in a day. And those type of pitches immediately caught on to people, as opposed to saying it's a conference for non-technical founders who can't code. And they're like, well, I kind of know what that means, but it's still a little ambiguous. So we just got in a way of explaining our businesses that were something that like a person in Missouri or Texas who's not involved in tech at all, but is still in our demographic, like our target age and our target, like they want to become something. We just learned how to describe ourselves better. And because of that, we realized that like what John and I, my co-founder, what we really who we admired were like rock and roll stars. So we love like the Black Keys. We love Tupac. We love like all these rock and roll and hip hop stars. And we're like, let's just like model our brand for them because they're really cool. And that way we're going to look way, 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 way different from the average startup. The good thing is that it's like everyone is like extremely similar in the startup world. So even if you're slightly different or weird, you like stick out so much.
Totally agree. I actually, as an investor, I hear presentations of so many people, and I just keep telling people, you know, even very often startuppers who are not, who already are advanced, who already have pretty good startups, they sort of don't realize that, you know, you've seen, as an investor or as a potential distribution channel, etc., you've seen hundreds of those presentations, and you're going to keep seeing presentations, products, services, etc. And if they don't stand out, if they're not that proverbial purple cow, they don't have much of a chance.
Exactly, and people don't realize how important that is. It's like, one example is, let's say they're using a website, like a WordPress theme, and it has 3 buckets. They feel like they gotta make shit up just to fit within those buckets. Like for example, like on a website homepage, you see like there's like the top theme is like to describe something, and then it says like step 1, 2, and 3 on how to do something. And I've noticed that like sometimes things could be described just in that one bucket, and then there's always like 2 and 3 buckets to like add text, and people just fill it just because they think it needs to be filled. And because of that, that's just one example of how like shitty and boring most websites could sound. In one of our websites, we had one of those 3 buckets. This was like our first iteration, and we didn't know what to put in the second and third bucket, so we just put like, this website had 3 buckets. We don't know what to say in this one. And then the third one was like, but here's a funny video of the street. Just go ahead and click on it.
Listening to you, I started thinking that we started with the word cool. And I think another word, which some people probably don't understand really well, is the word hustle. And I think probably you are the person who understands hustling really well. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I understand. I don't have a technical background. Prior to starting website businesses or internet businesses, I ran a hot dog stand. So I had a bunch of hot dog stands in college called Southern Sam. I've learned that like the small businessman is like you have to make a sale, otherwise you don't eat.
One thing, following up, building up on what you said, I couldn't agree more. I think actually if it were up to me, I think that kind of hot dog stand training would have been the best training any entrepreneur, technical or not technical, could get. Because
if you could sell meat to a stranger on the street, you'll sell anything.
Yeah, totally. I agree. I mean, it could be as simple as that. Here's a hot dog. What helpings do you want with it? And that's it.
Back then, we're like, all right, hot dog stand is inherently not that exciting. So what can we do to make this exciting? So we had my cute girlfriends at the time to like come and like we gave them a T-shirt that said like bikini weenie girls. They weren't actually in a bikini, but it said bikini weenie girls, and they would sell like so many hot dogs. So little things like that, on like to stick out on boring topics, and like is just huge.
Absolutely. I'm looking, so building up on what you said, having looked at so many startups and being a shareholder in a lot of startups, you sort of really always, especially as an investor, you always ask yourself a question: why did these guys become successful and why did these guys fail? And yes, maybe luck has a little bit to do with it, but I think to me, and I wonder what your take is, but I think to me that word hustle is probably the main difference. I don't know one team that would be seriously hustling, and I mean like really going out at it and selling, building, you know, PR channels, distribution channels, marketing channels, going to trade shows, connecting to people, presenting to people, creating viral channels, etc., etc. And I don't know one team doing that would fail, but I know tons of teams with great products that just don't hustle and they fail. So I wonder what your advice would be and what your take would be on this.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this as well. I've come to this question that I've asked, and it's, can entrepreneurs be made or are they born? I don't have an answer yet, but I noticed that like the people who I respect a lot because they've got a lot done, they're extremely aggressive and savvy, very like savvy. Like, they're very confident, aggressive, and savvy at how they approach things. I don't know if that aggression can be taught. I've tried to figure it out. I don't know if it can be taught, which it sucks because that's such like not an inspiring answer. But there's all the people I look up to. They are like a samurai. They'll kill themselves before they fail. Like that's the type of attitude we have. You gotta like they're like I'll fall on my knife before I give up and let this not work. I don't know. Can that be taught? I mean, I think it's a matter. Hustling is a matter of aggression and like just like being like knowing when to like be a hammer to smash through a problem, or when to be like a slick, like a sniper's bullet and like very precisely go through something. So like when I'm working on a problem, I analyze the situation and I'm like, is this a problem that I can just bulldoze right through, or do I got to be like slick and like be strategic? And then I plan that in my head all the time about situations, and I size people up all the time. And I don't know if that's could be taught or if that's just, I don't know.
You mentioned the samurai, and in Japanese contemporary culture, standing out, talking to strangers, being aggressive is considered like a seriously bad behavior. Like something really should not do. And so there is one Japanese school, I don't know which, I don't remember which one. They know that, and to your very good posted question, whether this can be not taught or not, what they're making, literally forcing their students to do, is to stand at a busy railway station and scream things and, you know, just offer things for sale, which is just like a really bad behavior. And people just hate doing that. But then once they sort of change it in themselves, they change. So I don't know if this could be really taught, but at least there could be some techniques to sort of
like optimize
make
like,
personalities. Yeah, kind of like question yourself, why can't you do this? You know, just like, why can't you be running? Why can't you be, you know, eating right, or, you know, doing other things?
Right.
So same.
Maybe it's like being an athlete, like a track runner, where it's like the really talented people, the people who are the best are really talented, so they're born that way, but they also work their ass off. However, in the sub-elite level, the people who are still really good, that they could have slightly less talent and way more hard work to get them there. So whereas like maybe like the 1%, the very best in the whole world, maybe they're just like born like Elon Musk. I think he was like just born messed up in the head in the good way, and he worked his ass off, and that is why he's there. But like there are still many people who we consider successful who maybe weren't born like extremely aggressive, but they learned what needs to get done, and they were driven enough that they're willing to do that. So yeah, I mean, one thing that I learned after reading a lot is that fortune really favors the bold, and bold people, it's counterintuitive, but a lot of folks like to be led. And so if you act like you know what you're talking about, people will follow.
I totally agree with you. And I think it doesn't really necessarily have to do with being aggressive. I mean, I can imagine you and I, we all know people who, you know, most programmers, not all of course, but most programmers are not exactly, you know, people who love to sell things or to market things. Most programmers are people who just love to sit and code, and nothing is wrong with that. And
right.
It's more of a question of sort of figuring out who you are and what you're doing. And if you're a programmer and you love to code, that's just fantastic. But you do need somebody in your team who'll be hustling.
Yeah, and when I say aggressive, I don't necessarily mean always selling something or like aggressive, like violent or anything. I mean aggressive, like aggressively moving forward to hit your goal.
Yep.
You're aggressively always pushing.
And speaking of which, let's go back to HustleCon and let's talk a little bit about the Hustling Conference and how you teach people to become better evangelists, and the whole why do they need HustleCon?
Right. So HustleCon started my co-founder and I, John, we started a website that helped people find roommates, and we eventually sold it, and it turned into an iPhone app. And the company that bought us 1 year and 1 day after they bought us, because I had to stay for a certain amount of time. It was miserable though. So 1 year and 1 day I left. A lot of people were asking how we were able to start a company even though we didn't know how to like code. And so we would just tell people one off, and then like, maybe there's like a big market for this. So what we did, or what I did, John was still there, is I cold emailed or called a bunch of people who I knew were founders of big companies, like the founder of Pandora or the founder of Polyvore, or just like a lot of companies, like big companies who were started by people who weren't technical. And I was like, hey, what if we gave you a stage and I brought a ton of people there? Would you teach a lesson on how you built what you built? And it'll be kind of like a school, like a 1 day school. And they all agreed. And then, so I launched the website on June 7th. The first event was on August 1st. And I started doing a lot of content. I started writing out a lot of stuff, and word just spread. And we ended up selling about 400 tickets in 7 weeks.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it made a bit of money. I think it made like $60,000 in like 7 weeks. And we're like, damn, this might be a real business that we have on our hands. So I took some time off to think about it and figure out what to do. And then I eventually convinced my old co-founder to join me. And then that's when we put on the last HustleCon, and it was like 6 or 7 times larger. And we had people flying from all over the world because they wanted to learn from successful founders on how to grow a company and start a company without knowing how to code. And so we say that a hacker is a programmer, but a hustler is the counterpart to a hacker. So, however, our event wasn't just for people who couldn't code. It was more so like a MBA in a day, where it was like people who want to learn about growing a company in terms of the business and not just the product. So we had lots of technical people come as well.
What are your views on the future? There are lots on the future of all of those conferences, hackathons, gatherings, seminars, meetups, etc. There are so many really, really awesome ones. I used to go 2-3 times a week. Right now, I probably go once a month, and even that mostly because my friends are doing something and I don't want to offend them. It seems like it's huge and it's so useful because people connect there, etc. What's your with technology developing and connecting us better and better and being so ubiquitous, and all of us staying in touch with each other at all the times if we want to? What are your thoughts on where this is going to go in terms of offline, online socializing of people?
So what we did and what we're doing is we're making it like more like a festival. And a lot of conferences have apps to like help people meet each other. Well, we actually said we're not going to do that. So we had zero technology with our conference to see if to make people mingle. But as for the future, I've thought about this a little bit. My roommate is into VR, and so is a couple of people I work with. They all have VR sets. I think it would be so cool to have like a virtual reality meetup. Like that's totally going to be that will absolutely work.
One other thought that I thought, besides virtual reality, the augmented reality seems to be just the amazing thing, and I think it's going to be here pretty soon.
What's augmented reality?
When you point your device at something and it augments reality, it adds things without you necessarily, going somewhere looking for it. Like, things starting to open, things starting to bring you to other things. It just saves lots of time, and also it's not pull but push, so you don't have to do anything. You don't even know that you can.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's wild. I'm not banking on any of that because we use events not as
too wild.
Well, no, we use events to build the brand and to let people and to provide value. But as a business, we're shifting so all of our content or all of our money is made through content. So we're trying to make our annual event just as exciting. I mean, we want it to be like as exciting as Coachella, where people are waiting year round to come. Yeah, so I'm not so worried about optimizing the event as I am making our content awesome. Because like, for example, like our website on Monday had like 250,000 people come to our website in one day. Like I could just like, it makes way more sense to optimize on that, spend our resources doing that. You know what I mean?
What do you think, Sam, makes the greatest events? And I know it's a very general question, so I'm going to try to narrow it down a little bit more. There, again, back to my previous question, tons of events, etc. But what are the things? What are the features, or maybe the types of things that happen at events that make them really, really worthwhile?
So I'll tell you a small confession. I have never really been to a conference before besides ours.
Great.
We model all of our events after concerts. I think concerts. Awesome. I go to concerts all the time. I think concerts have the best events because the best concert is one where you can go and you have never heard of the music or band beforehand, but it's still amazing because it's like it overloads your senses, and you're like the other day, I don't listen to No Doubt that much, but I went and saw them, but it was like so epic and larger than life that I was overwhelmed with excitement. Same with Circus Soleil. You know Circus Soleil?
Of course, been there, went there once.
You don't have to like whatever it is. You don't have to like theater or clowns, but you go there and you're like, I'm just overwhelmed with emotion right now. And so that's what the best events do that. So as much as I like to make fun of them, if you go to a TED Talk, like it looks beautiful, it's in a beautiful theater, and the speaker has so much energy and excitement, and you're like, you feel changed a little bit. And it feels like your senses are overloaded. So your surroundings are beautiful, and the speaker is great. So with us, we try to make it like that. I think the best events are kind of like that, where there's like an emotion overload.
You and I have been talking about events and about how amazing Silicon Valley is. This whole Bay Area places, even in comparison to Missouri or Texas. I'm not even talking about other countries where the whole technological innovation is not really a big thing, unfortunately. Hopefully yet. On the other hand, what really was a big surprise to me when I moved to San Francisco was the incredible amount of bullshit. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. But mind you, I lived in New York for 11 years, but the amount of bullshit here is just tremendous.
Yeah. It's a lot of jerk offs talking about how they got this business. It's like, no, you don't have a fucking business, dude. You just bought a domain name and you got a landing page that collects 5 emails a day. That's not a business. Shut up. Like, yeah, there is a lot of that bullshit.
That's exactly true. Like, I know so many people, lecturing who, they barely built any startups. They have no experience with anything, but they learned a thing or two, and they immediately are lecturing about stuff. But it seems
my biggest problem is all the people in San Francisco who say they're an entrepreneur, but you go to their LinkedIn and they have a full-time job.
Well, maybe they're like in Los Angeles, everybody's carrying a screenplay. So maybe they're carrying a business. But again, sorry for a long question, but I'm just probably trying to formulate it for myself as I'm asking it. So to me, as somebody coming from New York, the amount of bullshit in New York is great as well. But New Yorkers, to me, and I wonder what your take on this is, are somewhat more cynical in a good and in a bad sense.
Yeah.
You're trying to run things in front of a New Yorker, including proposals of selling a hot dog. And the New Yorker usually have been there, done that. But here, I feel that people here are a bit more gullible. And on the other hand, they teach each other the value of bullshit. And I'm not necessarily saying bullshit is a bad thing. Like when you're building your little startup and you're trying to persuade others that it's here to stay, there is probably, unfortunately, some necessary element of bullshit that's necessary there where you're inflating yourself. But what's your take on that? Where does the useless bullshit end, and where does the useful hustling
Well,
start? Where is it?
So I've learned that ultimately we're all full of shit a little bit, at least in the beginning. Like for example, like it's what's it called? Maybe like imposter syndrome or something. Like it's a secret that I don't tell people, but I actually don't really know a lot about what I'm doing. I mean, that's the truth. Like I feel that way all the time. I'm like, whenever like our first conference made a lot of money, our second one made way, way, way more money, and I'm like, in the back of my mind, subconsciously, I'm like, I can't believe this is working so well. So that's the truth. The truth is, I always feel like I'm full of shit a little bit, like, because I feel like why I feel like succeeding should be a lot harder or something like that. I'm like, am I doing something? Like, what's wrong? It feels weird. So we're all a little bit full of shit, and we all act like we know what we're talking about, but in reality, the internet is like 25 years old. No one knows that much about it. So once I learned that everyone else was just a little bit full of shit, it's a lot easier, because then I realized that all the stuff that I admire and the people I admire and the websites and companies I admire, they're all figuring it out. And so I realized that I could also not copy them, but do that. I could do that as well. So in that sense, that was good to realize that everyone was a little bit full of shit. As opposed, and along the lines of like there being lots of bullshit, there is lots of bullshit in Silicon Valley, but it's so easy to like see, like it's so easy. And so I think it's funny. Sometimes it's frustrating because it makes like people who are running companies, like it kind of makes them people who are not as serious about it. But I don't really care about that. It doesn't bring me down the way people act. But it is funny. I think it's funny that so many people want to be entrepreneurs, because it's not right for everyone. And I don't think one person is better or worse than another person because they've started a company. Like some people, they say they want to be entrepreneurs, but they actually might be a better like teacher or a better artist or a better this or that, which is like just as equally as admirable as starting a company. And so I think that people need to realize that people need to get a little bit more confident. Like starting a company is not in itself the cool thing, like what's cool is doing something and trying to be the best at it.
True, but it's really, really hard to live in Nashville and not want to play country music, and it's really hard to live in the area and not want to have a startup.
Right, but it's funny because it's actually, let's say you live in Nashville, I used to live in Nashville, and you start a punk rock band, the likelihood of you succeeding is probably higher than if you started a country music band. Do you know what I mean? So,
yes.
Like, people don't realize this, that if everyone's going one way, you are more likely to succeed if you go that way. So I think that people need to understand that a little bit more, that it's okay not to want to start a company, we've gotten into this attitude where it's like like we judge people if they're a founder or if they're not a founder, or if they've had a company sold or if they haven't. But that's not really like that. I've met a lot of people who are complete douches who on paper seem like they would be someone I'd admire because they started and sold a large company.
Yeah, totally agree with you. So probably the last question to you, I really, really enjoyed this. I wish, hopefully we'll get together at some point. You seem like the person that really is very, very unusual, very original. And my experience shows that it's people like you who create something that works versus people who just want to repeat something that somebody else came up with. The question, the final question to you, what would you suggest, what would be your one or more than one recommendation to people who are just starting, to people who are launching their startup, their first startup? What should be one big, or maybe more than one, big advice to them?
More than one. Well, I read a lot in high school. I stopped reading in college, and then I started reading again outside of college. And I noticed that the more I read, not just business books, but I read a ton of biographies, one to four biographies a month. So maybe almost one every 2 weeks. Reading has just stepped my game up, just a huge amount. I mean, once you start reading lots of biographies, you see patterns. So whatever, if I, like, for example, this is a media company that we're growing. I have Ted Turner's biography. I've got William Hearst's biography. I've got Pixar's biography. I mean, the guys who started Pixar, I'll just like read everyone who's been there. I'll read I'll devour their books and see patterns. So that's, like, in my mind, one of the best ways to achieve whatever you want to do is by reading biographies on people who you admire and want to become similar to. Another tip is to start doing lots of things. A lot of people don't realize that the websites and companies we admire always started out really, 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 really bad. And so what I like to tell people to do is to go to webarchive.com and go to their favorite websites and look at the first year and how they started and look how shitty it was. And so because of that, you realize that, like, the whole process is a bunch of iterations and not just like one idea. So I tell people just to, like, if they have this idea, just start it and do it for like 2 or 3 months and, like, find answers in the process. I think that the process is more important than anything. It's just the process of going through this, and you find problems and you find value, you find problems and then you find solutions where you can provide a lot of value to fix that. So I just tell people to start lots of stuff. I think I've had a couple hits in my life, very small hits so far, because I've swung hundreds and hundreds of times, but most people don't really swing that much. And so it's impossible to ever get a hit. So I just say, try tons and tons of stuff, constantly be doing things to try and follow where, but when you do that, you gotta find where you're interested in and where you can provide value. So I tell people to read a lot and to try a ton of stuff.
Sam, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, here you go. The really very original, very fun, and very useful to think to Sam Parr of HustleCon. Recommend to all of you going to hustlecon.com, right?
Yeah, well, we're going to be relaunching in July for The Hustle. So if you Google The Hustle, cool. If you Google The Hustle, you'll go to thehustle.com and you'll be able to find us.
Got it. So everybody, Sam Parr, Google The Hustle. Make sure that you participate in his awesome conferences where you'll learn more. But just to wrap up, here was Sam talking about most of us having some bullshit as a component of ourselves. The great idea, I totally support that, of reading biographies of people, especially people that you admire, on the necessity of starting things, not being afraid, and just getting into this thing and that thing, and just seeing what's going to happen and not being afraid to drop it in a couple of months if it doesn't work. Sam, thank you so much. Very much enjoyed it. And
perfect. Thank you.